The second topic is about describing the supply of fossil fuel. Basically, in this second subtopic, I'm going to analyze how, at the international level, at the global level, the fossil fuel is extracted and how different countries are affected by different kind of solution in terms of fossil fuel use and also the use for the energy production and electricity production. So first of all, the fossil fuel are the energy rich from the substance formed from millions and millions of years ago that is created by different microorganisms and living organisms. So it takes hundreds of millions of years before it's created. That's the reason why we're always talking about that is unsustainable continuing to drill and use the fossil fuel. So the three major fossil fuels are coal, oil, and of course natural gas. Natural gas, how we can see in the next lecture and the next subtopics, is increasing a lot. That is due for the discovery of new reserves, but at the same time it also represents the cleanest fossil fuel solution in terms of energy production. So basically the fossil fuels are made from hydrocarbons that contain carbon and hydrogens that are perfect for heating and also for burning and for creating any kind of energy. So, first of all, the coal. The coal is a solid fossil fuel that is formed for plant remains almost 340 million years ago, and it's quite easy to transport. Most of the mining of the coal are open, so it's quite easy also, to collect and also to drill, and it's also provide a lot of energy when it's burning. The worst things that first of all created a huge environmental impact in terms of mining and extraction. At the same time, when it's burning, represent one of the worst in terms of CO2 emissions. The coal reserve is changing a lot in the last 3 decades. So if you can see from this graph, North America represents the biggest, the first country in terms of coal extraction and use. Then we have Europe and Eurasia that represent the second country in terms of production. Then we have Middle East, Asia and Pacific, and also the Central America. The Central America represent the first in America and USA in terms of energy supply, but also represent the first in terms of using the coal for electricity production. If you can see from this other graph, you can see how the trend is completely changed, especially from the North America that increasing a lot the production in the last two decades, and the same also is from Asia and Pacific that start to dropping in 2012 and now start increasing a lot the production and the using of coal. The coal consumption and production is of course different from any different region. So the Asia and all the Pacific region, basically we're talking about Asia, talking about the China and India that represent the biggest production of the region. In fact, you can see from this graph it's almost reached 3 times compared to the other region. But how you can see here, starting from 2012, we already reached what is called the peak coal. It means that we already reach the maximum extraction. So we start to drop because the reserves start reducing a lot. But at the same time, if you can compare this one to the consumption doesn't look like that starting to drop compared to the production. So this is represent a gap in terms of energy supply. So that's the reason why all these kind of different countries we have to face and also yet to change the mix of energy production, because they can never reach, if they continue this kind of demand, to align the demand and supply, especially from the Asia. The rest of the country basically remains almost the same, except Africa that continue to drop the production and the consumption of coal. Natural gas is another fossil fuel that is product of millions of years of decade, and normally you find the oil and gas, the gas, in the pit, and normally are under the ocean. So it's very costly in terms of drilling and exploration. But the good thing is that is one of the cleanest fossil fuel. The natural gas can be transported via pipeline, but at the same time also can be compressed with the LNPG using the ship for the transport. So the distribution of the natural gas is changing so much. So if we start looking at this graph from 1996, 2006 and 2016, so this is the last survey in terms of natural gas distribution. So basically there was a little bit drop in Europe and Asia in 2006, but then now we reached the 30%. So the Europe became one of the biggest countries in terms of natural gas extraction and use. It's the same. This is represented by the Middle East, that increasing a lot. Basically, the production, extraction of oil, of gas. This graph represents the production by the region and the consumption by the region. As you can see from this graph, any kind of region increasing a lot the production and the consumption of coal. Any country never drop the production. So you can see from Asia, the Europe and Eurasia and North America. And the same is represented by the consumption. So the consumption does never drop, even if we can see from the previous graph, we almost reach very peak in terms of production. But you can see from here, basically the production, the consumption keep going and rising in any kind of country. And of course, this is stronger related also to the population growth. That's the reason why we have an increasing amount of gas production and gas supply. If you can see here, this is a graph that represents all the network and how all the market, how is moving basically from one country to another country. Russia represents one of the biggest producer and supply for all Europe. So there are two main pipelines, Nord Stream and South Stream. Australia is one of the smallest in terms of pipeline, but basically reach all the country. And the rest basically is shipped or moved from one country to another one. So if we're talking about the Europe, you can see how the Russia represents one of the biggest producer of gas, of natural gas. Oil is another important, and we will talking about during this course in many different lectures, and now we can see how the producer and how the supply of oil is completely changed the last 2 decades, and how, of course, how the OPEC also affect the supply of these fossil fuels. So also the oil is formed of million decades from organic materials buried under the seafloor, and of course it's subjected to extreme temperature and pressure. So there are some countries where it's quite easy, like in all the Middle East, to drill the oil, but there are some different countries like Indonesia, the other part of the North Europe and the North Sea, how is very difficult to drill and how caused during many years so much environmental impact. So usually the oil burn only the 30-35% and is the structure. So the part of the structure is a very small amount compared to the other fossil fuel. The oil reserve, it changes so much. As you can see from here, basically the North America remains quite the same until 2006. Then the production increasing so much and reach almost 3 times compared to 2006. The other country almost remain almost the same, but the Central North America represent one of the biggest producer in terms of oil reserve. The Middle East basically started to drop a lot if we compare to 86. But this kind of graph doesn't represent the reality of a reserve, because the reserve normally, even if they keep going, even if they continue to have reserve, this kind of supply is strongly affected by the policy of the OPEC and the Middle East. The production and the consumption remain quite the same, so the trend is increasing in both different countries, and you can see how there is any kind of trend that shows you something that changing in terms of production and consumption. Okay, the next subtopic we introduce the OPEC crude oil production.